I was just trying to help my daughter by answering her buzzing phone while she was in the shower. The voice on the other end was cold and calculated. The old woman is getting suspicious about the missing money. We need to move faster before she figures out what we've been doing. My blood turned to ice. They were talking about me. My own family was planning something terrible, and I had just stumbled into their conspiracy by pure accident. Thanks for being here with me today. Before we dive deeper into this story, please hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. It was a typical Sunday afternoon in my cozy little house in Portland, Oregon. The autumn rain was pattering gently against the windows, creating that peaceful sound that always reminded me of the many Sunday afternoons I'd spent with my late husband, Samuel. He'd been gone for 8 months now, and Sundays were still the hardest. The house felt too quiet without his gentle humming while he read his newspaper or tinkered with his woodworking projects in the garage. Laura had come over for our weekly visit, something we'd started after Samuel's funeral. She insisted it would help both of us cope with the loss, and I was grateful for the company. At 67, living alone was an adjustment I was still learning to navigate. Laura had always been my most attentive child, constantly checking on me, offering to help with errands, and making sure I wasn't struggling financially. After 42 years of teaching 3rd grade, my pension was comfortable. But Laura worried about everything from my grocery bills to my medical expenses. She'd been upstairs, using my bathroom for nearly 20 minutes, and I could hear the shower running. Her phone, left carelessly on my kitchen counter, had been buzzing insistently for the past few minutes. The vibration against the granite surface was becoming increasingly annoying, disrupting the peaceful quiet of my Sunday afternoon. Being the helpful mother I'd always been, I glanced at the screen. The caller ID showed Mark, with a heart emoji. I knew Mark was Laura's boyfriend of 6 months, though I'd only met him twice. He seemed pleasant enough, though something about his too eager smile and the way his eyes never quite met mine when we spoke made me uneasy. Samuel had always been an excellent judge of character, and I found myself wishing I could ask his opinion about Mark. The phone buzzed again, more urgently. I thought about Laura upstairs, probably washing her hair and unable to hear the persistent ringing. What if it was an emergency? What if something had happened to one of her children? Laura had 2 teenage boys who lived with their father across town, and my grandmother instincts kicked in immediately. I picked up the phone and swiped to answer. "Hello, this is Eleanor, Laura's mother. She's in the shower right now, but I can take a message." The voice that cut me off was sharp, impatient, and completely unfamiliar with the polite tone people usually used when speaking to an elderly woman. "Listen carefully. The old woman is getting suspicious about the missing money. We need to move faster before she figures out what we've been doing. How much more time do we need to get everything transferred?" My heart stopped. The words hit me like a physical blow, each one sinking into my consciousness with horrible clarity. The old woman, missing money. They were talking about me. My own daughter's boyfriend was discussing me like I was some obstacle to overcome, some problem to solve. I stood frozen in my kitchen, holding the phone with trembling fingers, afraid to breathe, afraid to make any sound that might alert him to the fact that the old woman herself was listening to every word of his conspiracy. "The bank statements are still going to her house," Mark continued, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. "She asked me yesterday why she hasn't received her monthly pension statement. I told her it was probably delayed in the mail, but she's not stupid. We need to finish this before she calls the bank directly." Another voice joined the conversation, and my blood turned to ice water when I recognized it. It was Laura. My Laura. My daughter, who had been so caring, so attentive, so worried about my financial well-being. "I'm working on it." Laura's voice came through the phone with a coldness I'd never heard before. "But we have to be careful. Mom's not as helpless as we thought. She's been asking questions about the power of attorney papers I had her sign. I told her they were just for emergencies, but yesterday she wanted to read through them again." The power of attorney papers. I remembered signing them 3 months ago when Laura explained that it would make it easier for her to help me with bills if I ever got sick or couldn't manage things myself. She'd been so concerned, so loving, insisting it was just a precaution. I'd trusted her completely. "How much have you transferred so far?" Mark's voice was businesslike, calculating. "About $38,000 from her savings," Laura replied matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "But there's still her pension account and the life insurance money from Dad. That's where the real money is, almost $200,000 total." My legs nearly gave out. $200,000. Money that Samuel and I had saved for 43 years of marriage. Money we'd planned to leave to our children, to help with their own children's educations, to ensure our grandchildren had opportunities we'd never had. Money they were stealing from me while pretending to care about my well-being. I heard the shower turn off upstairs, and panic shot through me. Laura would be down any minute. I had to hang up before she discovered what I'd overheard, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the enormity of what I'd just learned. "I have to go," Laura whispered urgently. "Mom's probably wondering where I am. We'll finish this conversation tonight. Just remember, we're almost done. By next month, everything will be transferred and we can disappear." The line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, still holding the phone, staring at the black screen as if it might offer some explanation, some way to make sense of what I'd just heard. The house around me suddenly felt foreign, unsafe. Every kindness Laura had shown me over the past 8 months now felt like manipulation. Every concerned question about my finances was revealed as reconnaissance for theft. Upstairs, I could hear Laura moving around, probably getting dressed. In a few minutes, she would come downstairs with that loving smile, kiss my cheek, and ask if I needed help with anything. She would look me in the eyes and lie to me, just as she had been lying for months. I placed the phone carefully back on the counter, exactly where she'd left it, and tried to compose myself. But my hands were shaking, and I could feel tears threatening to spill over. "Samuel," I thought desperately, "what do I do now?" I heard Laura's footsteps on the stairs, and somehow I managed to move to the living room, settling into Samuel's old recliner. My hands were still trembling, but I folded them in my lap and tried to look normal. When she appeared in the doorway, hair damp and skin glowing from her shower, she looked so much like the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after scraped knees and bad dreams. "Sorry that took so long, Mom," she said, with that warm smile I'd trusted my entire life. "I hope I didn't use up all your hot water." "No, honey, it's fine," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange in my own ears. She didn't seem to notice. Laura glanced toward the kitchen. "Did anyone call? I thought I heard my phone buzzing." The question felt like a test, and I failed it completely. "No, I don't think so," I lied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. It was perhaps the first time I'd ever lied to one of my children, and the shame of it mixed with the devastation of what I'd learned. She retrieved her phone and checked it quickly, her face showing nothing. Must have been a wrong number," she said casually, slipping it into her purse. "You know how it is these days, with all the spam calls." For the next hour, Laura chatted about her work at the insurance office, her boys' school activities, and neighborhood gossip. I nodded and responded appropriately, but inside I was screaming. Every laugh, every casual touch of my hand, every concerned question about how I was eating felt like another layer of betrayal being added to an already crushing weight. When she finally left, kissing my cheek and reminding me to call if I needed anything, I waited until her car disappeared around the corner before I allowed myself to fall apart. The tears came in violent waves, each sob tearing through me like a physical wound. I'd cried when Samuel died, but this was different. Samuel's death was a natural tragedy, something that happened to couples who'd been blessed with 43 years together. This was intentional cruelty from someone I'd given life to, raised, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally. As the initial shock wore off, my mind began working with the methodical precision that had made me an effective teacher for 4 decades. I started remembering things, connecting dots that had seemed innocent at the time but now revealed their sinister purpose. 3 months ago, Laura had insisted on helping me organize my financial paperwork. She'd been so concerned about my ability to keep track of everything after Samuel's death, so insistent that I needed help managing the complexities of widow life. I'd been grateful for her attention, touched by her devotion. Now I realized she'd been cataloging my assets, learning my account numbers, studying my financial routines. I remembered how she'd suggested I switch to online banking to make things easier, then offered to help me set it up when I'd expressed confusion about the technology. She'd sat right here in my living room, typing on my laptop, claiming she was just entering my basic information. Now I understood she'd been setting up access for herself. The power of attorney papers suddenly made horrifying sense. Laura had brought them on a particularly difficult day, just 2 weeks after Samuel's funeral, when I could barely function through my grief. She'd explained them as just a precaution in case I ever needed help, making them sound like a loving safety net rather than the trap they actually were. I thought about all the mail that had gone missing lately. My bank statements, pension notifications, even some bills that Laura had offered to help me pay online. She'd convinced me it was more efficient, more secure than the old paper system Samuel and I had used for decades. Every time I'd mentioned not receiving something, she'd blamed postal delays, computer errors, or bureaucratic incompetence. The most painful realization came when I remembered Samuel's warnings about Laura's financial troubles. Just 2 months before his death, he'd confided his concerns about her spending habits, her tendency to live beyond her means, her pattern of making poor decisions about money. "Eleanor," he'd said one evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset, "I worry about Laura. She's always been impulsive with money, but lately it seems worse. I saw her credit card bill when she left her purse open at Daniel's birthday party. She owes more than she makes in 6 months. I'd defended her then, as I always did. "Samuel, she's an adult. She'll figure it out, and if she needs help, we'll help her." "That's what I'm afraid of," he'd replied sadly. "Eleanor, promise me something. If anything happens to me, don't let anyone pressure you into financial decisions you don't understand, not even our children, especially not Laura." I'd brushed off his concerns as typical father worry, the same protective instinct that had made him check the locks twice every night and insist on walking me to my car in parking lots. Now I realized his intuition had been trying to protect me from something much worse than burglars or muggers. The cruelest part was realizing how perfectly Laura had played her role. Every visit had been carefully calculated to reinforce my dependence on her help while gathering intelligence about my financial situation. She'd listened to my grief about missing Samuel, my fears about managing alone, my confusion about navigating widowhood, and she'd used every vulnerability against me. I thought about Mark, too, and how his presence in Laura's life had coincided with her increased attention to my finances. During our brief meetings, I'd noticed his expensive clothes, his flashy watch, his casual mentions of gambling trips to the nearby casinos. Now I understood that my life savings were funding his lifestyle. As evening fell, I sat in Samuel's chair surrounded by the comfortable, familiar objects of our life. Together, the Afghan his mother had crocheted, the family photos covering the mantel, the books we'd shared and discussed over decades of quiet evenings. Everything that represented security and love now felt fragile, threatened. But underneath the devastation, something else was beginning to stir. It was faint at first, barely detectable beneath the waves of betrayal and grief. It was anger, not the hot, impulsive kind, but the cold, focused determination that had gotten me through 40 years of dealing with difficult students, demanding parents, and bureaucratic obstacles. Samuel had always said I was stronger than I realized, tougher than my gentle demeanor suggested. "Eleanor," he'd tell me when I doubted myself, "you've got steel in your backbone. You just keep it wrapped in velvet so people don't see it coming." Maybe it was time to let people see the steel. I reached for the phone book, a dusty relic that most people my age had long since discarded, but I'd kept it, along with many other old-fashioned habits that Laura had gently mocked as outdated. Tomorrow, I would start making some calls. Tonight, I would plan. Laura wanted to treat me like a helpless old woman who couldn't figure out what was happening to her own money. She was about to discover that 40 years of teaching had given me skills in investigation, organization, and strategic thinking that she'd clearly underestimated. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But it would be fought on my terms, with my rules, and with weapons they didn't know I possessed. I woke up Monday morning with a clarity I hadn't felt since Samuel's death. For months, I'd been drifting through my days in a fog of grief and confusion, accepting help without question, grateful for any kindness. But overnight, something fundamental had shifted. The vulnerable widow who had signed papers without reading them was gone. In her place was the retired teacher who had spent 4 decades solving problems, uncovering truth, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. My first call was to my bank at exactly 9 o'clock when they opened. First National Bank, this is Margaret speaking. How can I help you? Hello, Margaret. This is Eleanor Peterson. I'd like to request copies of all my bank statements for the past 6 months, including any accounts that might have been opened or modified recently. Of course, Mrs. Peterson. May I ask why you need these? We've been sending your monthly statements regularly. That's exactly the problem, I said, my voice steady and professional. I haven't been receiving them. There was a pause. That's very concerning. Let me check your account right now. I see here that your statements have been redirected to electronic delivery at your daughter's email address. The change was made 3 months ago with proper authorization. My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice calm. I need copies of everything sent to my home address immediately. Paper copies. And I want to review any authorization forms that were filed. Absolutely. I'll have everything ready for pickup this afternoon. Mrs. Peterson, I should mention that there have been several large transfers from your accounts recently. Is everything all right? That's what I intend to find out, I replied. After hanging up, I retrieved a yellow legal pad from Samuel's desk and created what I used to call an investigation matrix when helping students work through research projects. I divided the page into columns: what I know, what I suspect, what I need to prove, and action steps. Under what I know, I wrote down everything from the phone call, the $38,000 already transferred, plans to access my pension and life insurance money, the timeline of next month for their escape. Under what I suspect, I began listing Laura's suspicious behaviors over the past months: the missing mail, the insistence on digital banking, the power of attorney papers, even Mark's sudden appearance in her life right when her financial attention to me had intensified. The phone rang, interrupting my work. The caller ID showed Laura's number, and for a moment I considered not answering, but I needed to maintain the illusion that nothing had changed. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, proud of how normal I sounded. "Hi, Mom. I was thinking about you this morning and wanted to check if you needed me to pick up your prescriptions today. I'm going to be near the pharmacy anyway." Another lie. Laura had never offered to handle my prescriptions before, and I'd been managing them fine on my own. But now I understood the real purpose. She wanted access to information about my health, my medications, anything that might support a claim that I was becoming incompetent or forgetful. "That's very thoughtful, dear, but I already picked them up last week," I said. "I'm actually feeling quite energetic today. In fact, I'm planning to do some organizing around the house." "Organizing?" Laura's voice sharpened slightly. "What kind of organizing?" "Oh, you know how it is. Samuel's papers, financial documents, that sort of thing. I thought it was time I took a more active role in managing my affairs." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds too long. "Mom, are you sure that's a good idea? I mean, some of that stuff can be really complicated. Maybe I should come over and help you." "No need, sweetie. I taught 3rd graders for 40 years. I think I can handle some paperwork." I let a touch of steel creep into my voice. Besides, I might learn something interesting. After Laura hung up with a promise to check on me later, I drove to the bank. Margaret, a kind woman about my daughter's age, had everything ready in a thick manila envelope. "Mrs. Peterson," she said quietly, "I wanted you to know that several of these transactions raised red flags in our fraud prevention system, but they were authorized with your power of attorney documentation, so we couldn't stop them. I took the envelope with hands that didn't shake. "Thank you for your concern. I'll be reviewing everything very carefully." At home, I spread the bank statements across Samuel's desk like evidence in a criminal case. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. The transfers hadn't started 3 months ago. They'd begun just 6 weeks after Samuel's funeral, when I was still barely functional with grief. Small amounts at first, 500 here, 800 there, amounts I might not notice among the chaos of settling Samuel's estate and adjusting to widowhood. But over the months, the amounts had grown bolder. 2,000, then 5,000, then entire chunks of my savings account. The most recent transfer, made just 4 days ago, was for $15,000. I found records of new credit cards opened in my name, loans I'd never applied for, even investment accounts that had been liquidated without my knowledge. The power of attorney Laura had convinced me to sign hadn't been for emergencies. It had been a blank check to destroy me financially. My hands began to shake as I calculated the total. $67,000 gone. And according to their phone conversation, they were just getting started. I picked up the phone and dialed the number I'd found in the yellow pages the night before. "Peterson and Associates, this is Daniel." For a moment, hearing my son's voice almost broke my composure. Daniel, my eldest, the one who had always been responsible, methodical, honest, the one who'd inherited Samuel's ethical compass and my analytical mind. "Daniel, it's Mom. I need your help, and I need you to promise me you won't mention this call to anyone. Not your wife, not Catherine, and especially not Laura." "Mom?" Daniel's voice filled with immediate concern. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Sick?" "I'm fine, honey. But I've discovered something terrible, and I need an accountant I can trust. Can you come over tonight after work? And Daniel, bring your laptop and whatever you need to do a thorough financial investigation." "Of course, Mom, you're scaring me. What's happened?" I looked at the bank statements spread across the desk, evidence of months of betrayal and theft. "Your sister has been stealing from me, systematically, deliberately, and with help from that boyfriend of hers. They've taken over $60,000 so far, and they're planning to take everything else." The silence on Daniel's end was deafening. "Mom," he said finally, his voice hollow, "are you absolutely certain?" "I overheard them planning it. I have bank records. I have documentation. Daniel, they're not just stealing money. They're trying to make me think I'm losing my mind, so no one will believe me when I figure it out." "I'll be there at 6, Daniel said, his voice taking on the same steel tone I'd discovered in myself. "And Mom, don't trust anyone else until we figure out how deep this goes. If Laura's involved, we need to assume she might have enlisted help from people we don't suspect." After hanging up, I made one more call to the non-emergency line of the Portland Police Department. "I'd like to speak with someone about financial elder abuse," I said. "I believe I'm the victim of a systematic theft, and I have evidence." The officer who answered was professional and sympathetic. "Ma'am, I'm going to connect you with Detective Olivia Reed in our Financial Crimes Unit. She specializes in exactly this type of case. Can you hold for a moment?" As I waited for the transfer, I looked around my living room at the photos of my family. Laura at her high school graduation, beaming with pride. Laura at her wedding, radiant in white satin. Laura holding her newborn sons, glowing with maternal love. Had that love ever been real? Or had I spent 42 years loving someone who saw me only as a resource to be exploited? "Mrs. Peterson, this is Detective Reed. I understand you may be the victim of financial elder abuse. Can you tell me what's been happening?" Daniel arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, carrying his laptop and a briefcase that reminded me so much of Samuel, it made my heart ache. My eldest son had always been the responsible one, the child who double-checked his homework and arrived early for everything. Tonight, those qualities would serve us both well. Detective Reed had already reviewed my evidence and confirmed what I'd suspected. Laura and Mark had committed multiple felonies: financial elder abuse, identity theft, fraud, and forgery. The detective assured me that once we gathered enough evidence, arrests would follow quickly. "Mom," Daniel said, spreading his own financial documents across the dining room table, "I've been thinking about this all afternoon. We need to be strategic." If we confront Laura directly, she and Mark might disappear with whatever money they can grab. I nodded, feeling proud of my son's careful thinking. What do you suggest? A trap. We invite the whole family for Sunday dinner. Catherine, her husband, the grandkids, everyone. Make it seem like a normal family gathering. But we'll have Detective Reed waiting nearby and we'll have all the evidence ready to present. Won't Laura be suspicious if I suddenly want a big family dinner? Daniel smiled grimly. Not if we make it seem like your idea to feel less lonely. Tell her you've been missing having everyone together since Dad died. She'll think it's just grief making you sentimental. We spent the next hour planning every detail. Catherine would be told to come early, ostensibly to help with cooking, but really so Daniel could explain the situation before Laura arrived. Detective Reed would be parked outside, ready to respond when we called. The key is timing, Daniel explained. We let Laura get comfortable, let her think everything is normal. Then, when everyone's together, we present the evidence. She'll be trapped, surrounded by family, unable to run or lie her way out. I felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. In less than a week, I would destroy what remained of my relationship with my daughter, but she had made that choice when she decided to steal from me and betray my trust. Daniel, I said quietly, what if I'm wrong? What if there's some explanation? My son reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, I've reviewed every document. There's no innocent explanation for $67,000 in unauthorized transfers. There's no excuse for forged signatures or redirected mail. Laura made her choice. The phone rang and we both froze. Laura's name appeared on the caller ID. I answered with forced cheerfulness. Hello, sweetheart. Hi, Mom. I've been thinking about what you said earlier about organizing papers. Maybe I should come over tomorrow and help. I don't want you to get overwhelmed. Daniel was shaking his head vigorously, but I already had my response ready. Actually, Laura, I had a different idea. What if we had a big family dinner this Sunday? I've been missing having everyone together. Would you and Mark like to come? I'll invite Daniel and Catherine too. Oh, Laura sounded surprised. That sounds lovely, Mom. Are you sure you're up for cooking for everyone? I think it would be good for me, like old times with your father. I let my voice crack slightly, playing into the grieving widow role she expected. Of course, we'll be there. Should I bring anything? Just yourselves. And Laura, don't mention it to Daniel or Catherine. I want to surprise them with the invitation. After she hung up, Daniel looked at me with something approaching admiration. Mom, you're getting scary good at this manipulation thing. I straightened my shoulders, feeling Samuel's strength flowing through me. 40 years of teaching, honey. I've dealt with liars before. The only difference is that this time it's personal. Sunday evening arrived with the crisp air of autumn, and my dining room glowed with the warm light of candles I'd placed on the table. I'd spent the afternoon cooking Samuel's favorite pot roast recipe, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. Catherine had arrived early as planned, and Daniel had quietly explained the situation while I pretended to focus on dinner preparations. My middle daughter's face had gone through the same progression of emotions I'd experienced: disbelief, horror, anger, and finally, grim determination. Mom, she'd whispered, we're going to make this right. Laura and Mark arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, Mark carrying a bottle of expensive wine that my money had probably purchased. Laura kissed my cheek with the same warm smile she'd worn while robbing me blind. Mom, everything smells wonderful, she said, helping herself to the appetizers I'd laid out, just like when Dad was alive. For 30 minutes, we maintained the facade of a normal family dinner. The grandchildren chattered about school, Catherine shared stories from her work at the hospital, and Daniel discussed his accounting practice. Laura and Mark played their roles perfectly, the loving daughter and her attentive boyfriend, concerned about my well-being and grateful for my hospitality. But I watched Mark carefully throughout dinner. His eyes constantly scanned the room, cataloging items, calculating values. When he complimented my antique china, I knew he was mentally appraising it. When he admired Samuel's watch collection displayed in the hallway cabinet, I saw the greed behind his smile. After dessert, as everyone relaxed with coffee, I stood up and cleared my throat. I wanted everyone together tonight because I have something important to discuss. I began, my voice steady and clear. It's about my financial situation since Samuel passed away. Laura's face immediately showed concern. Mom, if you're having money troubles, you know we're all here to help. That's very kind, dear. But the problem isn't that I need help. The problem is that someone has been helping themselves. The room fell silent. Mark's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. Laura's smile faltered. I walked to the sideboard where I'd arranged the evidence Daniel and I had compiled. Bank statements, transfer records, forged documents. Over the past 6 months, $67,000 has been stolen from my accounts. Stolen by someone with power of attorney access. Someone I trusted completely. Mom, Laura said, her voice rising, what are you talking about? No one's stolen anything from you. I picked up the bank statements and began reading aloud. Transfer to Laura Peterson, checking account, $5,000. Transfer to Mark Dixon credit card payment, $3,000. Withdrawal from Eleanor Peterson savings account, authorized by Laura Peterson, $15,000. Mark suddenly stood up. This is ridiculous. Eleanor, you're confused. You asked Laura to help with your finances because you couldn't manage them yourself. Did I? I turned to face him directly. Is that why you told Laura on the phone that the old woman is getting suspicious about the missing money and you needed to move faster before she figures out what we've been doing? The color drained from both their faces. I heard every word of your conversation last Sunday, Mark. Including the part where Laura said she'd transferred $38,000 so far, but there was still my pension and life insurance money to steal. Almost $200,000 total, wasn't it? Laura jumped to her feet. You were listening to my private phone calls? I answered your phone by accident when Mark called to discuss robbing me blind. Hardly private when you're planning crimes against your own mother. Daniel stood and handed me his phone. I think it's time to make that call, Mom. Catherine had tears in her eyes, but her voice was steel. Laura, how could you? After everything Mom and Dad did for us? You don't understand, Laura screamed. She has more money than she needs. She's just sitting on it while Mark and I are drowning in debt. She would have given it to us eventually anyway. So you decided to take it without asking? I said quietly. You decided to make me think I was losing my mind? You decided to steal my husband's life insurance money. The money he worked 43 years to leave for all of us? Mark grabbed Laura's arm. We need to go, now. But Daniel was already blocking the door, and Catherine had moved to the window. I don't think so, Daniel said calmly. I dialed Detective Reed's number. Detective? It's Eleanor Peterson. They're here and they just confessed. You can come in now. Within minutes, police cars filled my driveway. As Detective Reed read Laura and Mark their rights, my daughter looked at me with hatred I'd never seen before. This is your own daughter, she screamed as the handcuffs clicked into place. How can you do this to your own family? I looked at her for a long moment, this stranger who had worn my daughter's face while betraying everything our family stood for. Laura, I said quietly, the moment you decided to steal from me, you stopped being my family. You became just another criminal who thought an old woman would be too weak or too confused to fight back. As they led her away, I felt Samuel's presence in the room, and I knew he would have been proud of me for finally showing the steel wrapped in velvet. 6 months later, I stood in the community center addressing a room full of seniors and their families. The banner behind me read, Elder Financial Abuse Prevention Workshop, and the faces looking back at me showed the same mixture of vulnerability and determination I'd felt that terrible Sunday when I first discovered the truth. My name is Eleanor Peterson, I began, my voice clear and confident, and I'm here to tell you that being victimized by someone you love doesn't make you weak or foolish. It makes you human. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly once Detective Reed built the case. Laura pleaded guilty to elder abuse, identity theft, and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence of 3 years in prison. Mark, with his previous gambling debts and criminal record, received 5 years. Most importantly, I recovered $42,000 of the stolen money, with the rest secured through the sale of assets they'd purchased with my funds. But the greatest victory hadn't been financial. The hardest part, I continued to my audience, isn't losing the money, it's losing your ability to trust, especially when the person who betrayed you is someone you raised, someone you loved unconditionally. After the arrests, Daniel and Catherine had rallied around me with a fierce protectiveness I hadn't expected. Daniel handled the legal complications while Catherine helped me set up new accounts and security measures. They'd both apologized repeatedly for not seeing the signs, though I assured them Laura had been expertly manipulative. But here's what I learned, I told the workshop attendees. Recovery isn't just about getting your money back. It's about reclaiming your power, your voice, and your right to be treated with dignity. The speaking engagements had started when Detective Reed mentioned my case to a local senior advocacy group. They'd asked me to share my story, and I'd discovered something unexpected. Helping others felt like the best use of the strength I'd found within myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Watching your live stream at work. Dad would be so proud. Love you, Mom." I smiled, thinking about Samuel. In quiet moments, I still felt his presence, but now it came with pride, rather than the desperate need for guidance I'd experienced in those first dark months of widowhood. Financial predators count on our silence, I explained to the group. They count on our shame, our family loyalty, our fear of not being believed, but silence protects them, not us. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor who'd become one of my closest allies, raised her hand from the front row. "Eleanor, what would you say to someone who's just discovered they're being stolen from?" "Document everything," I replied immediately. "Trust your instincts. And remember that family love doesn't require you to accept abuse. Real love protects. It doesn't exploit." After the workshop, a woman about my age approached with tears in her eyes. "My son has been pressuring me to sign over my house," she whispered. "I thought I was being paranoid, but after hearing your story..." I took her hands in mine. "You're not paranoid, you're wise, and you're not alone." That evening, I sat in Samuel's chair, looking through the latest batch of letters I'd received. Stories from across the country, from people who'd watched my interviews or attended my workshops. Grandmothers discovering missing savings, widowers realizing their trusted children were stealing their pensions, entire families torn apart by financial abuse. Each letter reminded me why this work mattered, why surviving Laura's betrayal had led me to something larger than just my own healing. I picked up my tablet to review my schedule for the next month: 3 more workshops, 2 podcast interviews, and a meeting with state legislators about strengthening elder abuse laws. At 77, I had more purpose than I'd felt since retiring from teaching. The scared, grieving widow who'd answered that phone call 8 months ago was gone, replaced by someone Samuel would barely recognize but would absolutely admire. Before bed, I walked to the mantel and touched the photo of Samuel and me on our 40th wedding anniversary. "Thank you for teaching me I was stronger than I knew," I whispered. "Now I'm going to spend whatever time I have left making sure other people discover their strength too." Outside my window, the Portland evening was peaceful and quiet. Inside my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Samuel's death: complete security in my own power to protect myself and others. That was worth more than all the money Laura could have stolen. Thanks for staying with me through this story. Your support means everything. If you know someone who might need to hear this, please share it. Until next time, remember that your voice matters, your story matters, and you're stronger than you know. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts.